Okay, I think we'll get started. Welcome to this side event at the 53rd session of the UN Statistical Commission called the Data Values Project, Reimagining How We Unlock the Value of Data for All. My name is Jenna Slotin. I am the Policy Director of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. So first, we have a few housekeeping items. We have simultaneous interpretation into Spanish available for you on this webinar today. You can access that by selecting the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and choosing the language of your choice. We invite everyone to use the Zoom chat box to introduce yourself and let us know where you're listening from, just to get a sense of the diversity of participants today. Also, we will have time for audience Q&A, so please submit all your questions into the Zoom chat. Okay, so let's dive right in. Data is, as everyone knows and is acutely aware, data is increasingly entwined with all aspects of our lives and is rapidly shaping society. So this is leading to increased public scrutiny, very much mounting demands on statistical systems, which many of you are acutely aware of and in the trenches dealing with. But also it's increasing pressure to think really critically about who controls, who's involved with, and who's affected by the production and use of data. And our partners at the Global Partnership sort of felt it was time to take a step back and define what values really should be underpinning the development of equitable data and statistical system. And the Data Values Project aims to do just that. It's coordinated by the Global Partnership and led by our technical advisory group. And it's a collective effort with many governments, civil society organizations, international organizations, and companies around the world to develop common positions and views on the ethics, rights, and governance issues, which we need to create the foundations for more inclusive and equitable data systems. Since the spring of last year, the Data Values Project has engaged over 150 organizations for consultation and discussion on what defines equitable data and statistical systems. And so today, as part of the Data Values Project, I'm really delighted to be co-hosting this event with the UN Statistics Division. And as part of the consultation on data values, I'm particularly excited that we'll hear today from an outstanding lineup of speakers who are defining and embodying these values in their day-to-day work. So in our first high-level panel, we will hear from the leaders of national statistical offices in Canada and Colombia, Mr. Anil Arora and Mr. Juan Daniel Oviedo. We'll also hear from the Assistant Director of the UN Statistics Division, Francesca Perucci, and Benga Sesan, the Executive Director of Paradigm Initiative, a leading digital rights organization in Africa. And all of these speakers will share their own practical experience on how they've advocated for and taken concrete steps to make data systems more inclusive. In a second segment of the discussion, we'll hear from two colleagues in Kenya, one from the Kenyan Bureau of Statistics and the other from the United Disabled Persons of Kenya, who will share their unique reflections from joint work that they've undertaken on Kenya's Inclusive Data Action Plan. So we'll start with the first panel. But before we begin, I just wanted to share a quote from an event at the Global Disability Summit earlier this week. Pamela Molina, Executive Director of the World Federation of the Deaf, said, "Disability inclusive data doesn't just mean including disability as a theme in questions." She said, "It's including persons with disabilities and those most underrepresented inside the disability movement in the design, development, and evaluation of methods." And so now I'd like to turn to our panel with that sort of setting the scene. There's a lot of dialogue and practice around what it means for data systems to center around inclusion and equity. I'm going to pose a single question to all speakers, and we'll hear your responses one by one. So to each of you, from your perspective, what are the one or two defining features of inclusive and equitable data and statistical systems? We'll go to you first, Anil, and then we'll hear from Juan Daniel, and then Francesca, and then Benga. So over to you, Anil.
Well, thank you very much. And it's an honor to be with all of you, and what a distinguished panel. So a real pleasure. I would say, a number of things have been sort of building up over time. You see, more demands for inclusion in society. I think that's been exacerbated by the demands have been exacerbated by a number of events. In for example, the United States and the whole George Floyd issue here in Canada, in the Indigenous sphere, with the discovery of children's graves in residential schools. The pandemic, took that to an entirely new level, and all of a sudden, our old paradigm of looking at statistics, by kind of compartmentalizing them and seeing, at best, what is the average? Or if, you got a little bit more sophisticated, you might get to, what is the median, for example, and or you provided a distribution, or you quintiled them and so on. That's, I'm not being entirely fair, but that's been our kind of mode of how do we put out statistics, and then we track over time and put a nice time series to it. What these events have shown us, that in fact those are completely disconnected from reality, because at the center are people, and it is about the interactions of health and economy and our social structure, and now more and more the environment. And the questions that are being raised are far more sophisticated. And in Canada, we saw that in spades. Who is being disproportionately impacted more so than others, and why? And what are the factors that are contributing to that disproportionate impact of what is going on, either, as I said, socially, economically, and I would say even more and more environmentally. And that just means that our data systems have to go from that sort of vertical way into looking at it in a horizontal way. And now they have to include the disaggregation of data. And that brings in a very different way of looking at things. And that means that we have to now start to work with colleagues right across the system who in fact have a lot of that disaggregated data. And, in Canada, for a long, long time, there was a real lack, if you like, of data, but there was also not an acceptability that we should be collecting that kind of information, because a lot of people felt that it could be used, and it was, and probably in some cases, against people. So one of the strictest values I think we have to make sure of is that we don't do this in spite of people, but we do it with people. They have to be part of this dialogue. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we are learning, is that we have to understand the lived experiences of the Black Canadian, of the Southeast Asian Canadian, or the business that works in a specific sector. So this isn't just about people. As I said, this is about the economy, social health, all interacting with each other. And it is a very different way in which we need to reach out to our colleagues. We also have to play a stewardship role, not just here's the data, now what do you do with it? But we actually have to make sure that those data are based on consistent standards, consistent classifications that align internationally and domestically, so that we don't just have more volume, because when we have more volume, we actually risk segregating, and we actually risk separating what is going on. And I think the challenge now is, how do you put it together and integrate it in a way that we can make sense? Because that second question that I was telling you about that we're getting is, so what does this mean for us as policymakers and decision makers? And now where do we go from here? So if we just have more volume that's all fragmented in different ways to show the same phenomena, I don't think that helps us. I think we have to start to work. That means that as statistical agencies, our value has to be about adding value. And how do we work with our partners? So it's not just about data grabs, but it's about saying, what are your needs and how can we be helpful? And I think it is the art of statistics. It's the science of statistics. It's our infrastructure, it's our expertise, it's our classification systems, it's our definitions that we now have to bring to play. A very different bar, and I would say a very different value set that we now bring to what is a very changing, unchanged society. Thank you.
Thanks so much. A great way to kick off. So now we'll move over to Juan Daniel to hear about experiences in Colombia, please.
Thank you, Jenna, and a warm hello to Francesca and to Anil. And I wanted to capitalize from the message from Anil because I'm very positive about what he's saying. And it's that we understand very well that when we are talking about inclusiveness and equity of a statistical system, we automatically, in my case, we go directly to this important motto that a team up together around the 2030 agenda, which is leaving no one behind and making visible what's happening with every differential perspective of our societies centered on the citizen, something that Anil was mentioning. But what he was saying is something very powerful. It's not enough to make everybody visible because we need to understand and be aware that the public value of information is how not only it is produced, but also how this information is going to empower dialogues, how it's going to be able to illustrate public policies, but also how it's going to be able for non-governmental organizations or civil society organizations to have a voice in the public policy perspective. And that's why this is very important to understand that if the purpose of the public value as regards as equity and inclusiveness of a statistical system is how we are going to empower conversations or to empower discussions about allowing everybody to have a voice, we should move towards new dimensions that are very, very precisely established in this objective of, for example, national statistics offices becoming data stewards. We need to promote data literacy. We need to communicate better what we are doing. And at the same time, we need to set in a very ethical perspective how the differences are settled in our society from the statistical information that we produce. That's why in this effort of measuring what we treasure, in this objective of having this project of the data values project that I value very much, and I want to take advantage to congratulate the efforts of this initiative, we need to understand that at the same time to empower those dialogues, equitable data and statistical systems must be supported by sound data governance. And this is very important because those concepts which are highly discussed in the international community about data governance, data stewardship, could be together in this initiative of having equitable and inclusive statistical systems in our societies. So data and statistical information is an enabler of inclusion, but at the same time is an agenda setter of some important discussions that we are going to set in our societies. And that's matter. I enjoyed reading that very much. And at the same time, it allowed me to understand something that I would like to show in a very fast way regarding how this issue of inclusiveness is an enabler also of trust in official statistics and in statistical systems, because the enabler of trust, which is produced by inclusiveness, is that we are going to produce relevant information sets for our societies, but at the same time, due to the ethical dimensions of inclusiveness and equity, we are going to be very focused on quality of the information we produce. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those great comments. Really interesting to hear, and to hear from, two very different countries, how you're grappling with such similar challenges. Over to you, Francesca, to give us that global perspective.
Thank you, Jenna, and great to be here, humbled to be with such a great speakers today. And thanks also for, I'm grateful for being part of the Data Value Project with GPSDD. It's been a great experience. Well, if I had to give sort of my ideal definition of what an inclusive data and statistical system is, I would say that it's a system that is developed from a user-centric perspective, where data are relevant to all parts of the population and reflect the needs of and priorities of all groups. It's also a system that offers, I would say, open and accessible, offers data in an open and accessible manner. And in a nutshell, I would say it's about creating a culture where data users are also co-owners of the data. So I want to be clear, inclusive data is not disaggregated data to me. And it's not about counting the people in those specific groups, right? When we started the SDGs, there was a lot of focus on, okay, these are the indicators, how do we disaggregate them? And then, a lot of the normative work for some of these groups was about how do you define them and you count them, right? Which of course is very important to allow for comparability, for building time series, etc. But it's not about that. That's just the first step. What you need is really to include these groups and have consultations from the very beginning of the data value chain. When you set the priorities, when you define what data you need to collect. But I would say that, as Anil was also hinting at, we are the statisticians. I think we have a responsibility to create the right framework for this. So you engage with civil society, you engage with users, you understand what the priorities are, but then you have to create the system. You have to have a data system that is well governed, where you can integrate different data sources, respecting, privacy, confidentiality, making sure you don't introduce biases, making sure you respect data rights of people. So you have to create a very well governed system to allow for those principles to be implemented, to check for data quality, for instance. So overall, I think it starts from the very, very beginning, when you set your priorities, and then when you really define the tools, how you measure it, what you measure, and how you measure is fundamental. It's not about disaggregating a posteriori once you have the data. So that's from where I sit, and then working with countries also, I've seen that they've been increasingly taking a user-centric approach in there, and they have a strong vision for that increasingly. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Francesca. Great to hear your three perspectives, and very much as insiders from a national statistical system. So now we're going to turn to Benga Sassan, more of an outsider coming from a civil society organization based in Nigeria. Please share with us your perspective, Benga.
Thanks, Jenna. Thanks for calling me an outsider, because that really helps. That really helps with the points I'm about to make. So I'm not a statistician. I'm more like a data user. And so for me, design comes from the point of the person who the data is about. So usually when I hear people talk about data, as if data is the entity, then I get worried, because data is actually information about people. So the real center of data, the entire value chain, should be people, because I know there's a temptation, like they say, to a man with a hammer, everything is a nail, right? So if you work with data all the time, there's a temptation for you to think that data is really what you should focus on and not the people. And in designing, statistical systems, I think it is really important, and we're talking about inclusion, to, of course, definitely we're talking about a scenario where there is absolutely no exclusion, where you are not determining data principles about people without their contribution or without serving their own purpose. I always love to quote a late politician from Nigeria who said that you can't shave a man's head, you can't barb for someone in their absence, right? And I think that is what we do when we design data systems without considering exactly what people want. I know there's a temptation at times to be tokenistic about it. So the process, we throw in some civil society people, we sprinkle some academia, we invite some researchers and all that. But I think in all, it has to be a bottom-up system that is designed without assumptions. And I say this because I have also been part of processes where we are tempted to make assumptions on behalf of people. A recent example was when we had this conversation about artificial intelligence and, and the bottom of the pyramid in the continent where I work, which is Africa. And I said, honestly, it is really difficult to say you want to find the opinion of people about some things that they may not be aware of. But the reality is that this was the same mistake we made when mobile phones were going to come to many African countries in the late 90s and early 2000s. The assumption was, nah, poor people don't need mobile phones. But guess what? Today, where is the fastest growing market where everyone is taking telecom services to? So I think it's really important when we build systems to realize that we're not building for today. We're building for a full spectrum, which includes the future that we honestly do not know as much as those who have the lived experience of that. I think it's important. I mean, I'm from the civil society, so you can imagine I'm going to talk about maximizing civil society expertise, but I don't say that lightly. I say that because many times we get invited when the food is already cooked and we're asked to taste it. Of course, if you taste the food, we're going to tell you if it's terrible or great. And if it's terrible, you have to go all the way back to the kitchen. But the beauty of being involved from the beginning is we can almost tell that you're adding too much pepper. We can almost tell this is too much salt. And so before the food is done, we can correct the ingredients. And I think that is one thing that is really important to say here. And also, this is the advantage of speaking last, by the way. You get to build on what everyone else has said, and you don't have to say too much. I think it's important for us to understand that building data systems, statistical systems, must also respect the three principles that I work around a lot in terms of data rights and human rights. One is necessity. I get worried when I see data systems built around unnecessary data. I work in many African countries where people have already registered 7 times. In Nigeria, you actually have 8 different institutions collecting biometric data from the same citizen. It's not necessary, right? I've refused, for example, to register for the national identification number in Nigeria right now because, for God's sake, 8 people have my data. Why do you want to collect another one, the same data again? Obviously, it's because there's a lot of corruption in the earlier data, there's mismatch and all of that, but it has to be necessary. When we're designing systems, necessity must be considered. Then it must also be proportional. Why are you asking for my biometric data? Because I want to write examinations. Everybody who writes entrance examinations into universities in Nigeria has to submit biometric information. Same thing if you're writing exams in your final year. And I know that this may come as a surprise to many of us here, but that's the lived experience, that people have to give unnecessary data simply because they want to write exams. I mean, we can go all the way and talk about refugees and all of the controversy around that. But I'm even speaking of students who already are in the system and want to move from one level to the other, and you're asking them again for a new set of data. And of course, legality. Just last year, part of an initiative where I work, we produced a report looking at the 20 years of data protection authorities in Africa. And what we found will not surprise you because you all work in the in the sector. But what we found is that there are at least 16 African countries that are gathering data illegally. Why? Because there is no legal framework to gather the data. Of course, a lot more countries now have data protection laws, but there is no data protection commission, which leads me to my final point of seeking redress in the case of abuse. Yes, data systems should protect people. It should be about people, but just in case something goes wrong, there must be a system within there that allows me to seek redress. I'll pause it and pass back to you, Jenna. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Benga. Really, really valuable to hear your perspective and to kind of hear that diversity. So I'm just mindful of the time and we want to keep moving. I have one more question for each of you. I'm going to ask you to try to keep it to about 3 minutes so that we do have time for questions. So back to Anil now. Can you share a bit about how Stats Canada has taken a more institutional or systemic approach to advancing equity and what principles have shaped your approach, please?
Well, let me pick up on a couple of the themes that have been already raised. We've actually taken the whole necessity and proportionality framework and have actually taken all the sources of data that we have, classified them in terms of sensitivity. We've now set up the governance systems that look at the ethical use of linkages. We've systemized, who has access, for how long, when do they have that access, and then a whole system which says, okay, what is the necessity and proportionality framework based on sensitivity of the data? What is the intended use, and so on. I think absolutely right at the front end, it's about playing that stewardship role. As you said, it's inviting people, not when the food is ready and on the table, but when you're starting to put the ingredients together and say, does this make sense? So that the framework, as we move towards quality of life frameworks that take all those indicators and start to now give us a sense of different domains of society, that they're built on that solid foundation. It's an inclusive start, not an inclusive finish. So we have to look at the whole spectrum and look at the whole data value chain. And so it is about the culture that we have to have. It's about the people who are actually sitting and designing these programs. If they're not inclusive, if they are not diverse, well then, how are we going to actually create outputs that are? Now remember, there's a theory and then there's a practice. In many cases, we do get to sit down and have a really good conversation, when a program is being designed, a regulation is being put together, or a new policy is coming into place, and we can influence, the data flows. But in many cases, we don't. We're not part of that, or it's been in play for a long, long time. And so that makes it a little bit more challenging, I would say. In our case, we have jurisdictional issues. Data don't just flow directly to the statistical system at the national level. So again, it's slow, steady work to work in that ecosystem, which is expanding at a very fast rate. And in some cases, we're making progress. I would say in some cases, it's a little bit more of a grind. But we're in the game. We're working towards this thing. So I don't want to leave everybody or anybody thinking that it's all great in Canada and we've got it out. This is a movie that was halfway in play. We're catching up to some things and we're influencing other things that are being built. But it's about capturing the moment where I think people are saying, look, enough. This is where we need to go. And I think that's where we have to have the right tool sets. We have to have the right infrastructure. We have to have the right frameworks. We have to have the right expertise and the right culture with the right skills that we can actually start to pivot and move these systems forward right from start to the end. So to your question, this is where leadership comes into play. And that's what we have to do as heads of statistical institutes, is actually play that leadership role. And it requires us to have different skill sets, the different governance, and actually embed those values that people want to see in our outputs, in our data. They don't, we can do all this work, but at the end of the day, if it's all about deficits and comparisons, I don't know what we've really provided. I think we have to provide that integrated framework, which brings in geospatial, which brings in interfaces and hubs and portals, and it brings in much richer analysis. That's the direction that we're moving it. It's hard work. It's going to take some time, but I think it's the right work that we should do.
That's fantastic and really wonderful to hear for a statistical institute in a country like Canada that you very much see it as a work in progress, but that it is a meaningful and important, sort of medium or longer term endeavor. Over to you, Juan Daniel. A question to you. DANE has sought to mainstream inclusivity throughout the statistical system. So what have you learned about putting ideas and concepts around equity inclusion into practice?
And in that respect, I would like to insist on the fact that this is becoming transformational for the National Statistics Office and for the National Statistics System, because this is probably something that you have heard before from myself, is that sometimes statisticians, with the argument of independence, we keep isolated from what's happening in our society. But when we want to foster the public value of the information that we produce, we need to understand very well who is using this information and how they are using that information. And this implies that we need to have to set, as Anil and Francesca Gwenga were mentioning, we need to set dialogues. And interdisciplinary dialogues are very important in order to get these equitable and inclusive statistical systems. And this has been a process itself, because at the same time, people that we are trying to make visible historically have faced discrimination and have faced some situations under which, if they are invisible, we don't care about measuring very well in a very precise way what's happening with them. So when we try to get to them, we have a barrier of trust, because they say, okay, right now you want us to be visible, but for example, in the case of Colombia, public budget for indigenous population is allocated proportional to the amount of population that they have in indigenous territories. But indigenous territories are not looking forward for indigenous people to staying on their territories. They have the right to move abroad and to have the opportunity to live in the city or to live somewhere else. So when we go to the indigenous territories and we consult with them and we measure the population of indigenous territories, they say something's wrong. We should be more population, yeah, because they are thinking about the way they are an indigenous population. So they don't care about if their members are inside or outside the indigenous territory. They are an indigenous people that are very tied together. So this understanding and the lack of trust implies that we need to make them aware of what's happening. And for example, we need to be present in the territory, and we need to talk to them and to explain and to make them understand that they should care about what's happening abroad their indigenous territory. For example, in the case of the Cancuamo population in Colombia, the population which is inside the Cancuamo territories assigned by the state is lower than the population abroad the Cancuamo territory due to violence, due to conflict, the historical conflict of our country. So when we go there and we try to empower the information that we are producing, we are telling them they are not in the indigenous territory, but they are abroad, and they are facing poverty, and they are facing discrimination in the main capitals of Colombia. So instead of complaining that you should be more, we should work together in order to make a government to change the way of allocating money for indigenous population, because the money should be allocated in proportion of the amount of population, no matter where they live, because they are people together. So this is something very important, because as a matter of example, in this situation, we need to see how, when we are trying to do our best, we face a lack of trust because of history in the case of Colombia, but at the same time, we need to find a toolkit under which, as Anil was mentioning, after this conversation, they wanted to have an information system to make this information clear, to have a geo-differentiated approach of where, in a very respecting confidentiality, where their friends and their brothers were living in and which conditions they were facing. And this is something that helped us to learn that in this task, as Francesco was mentioning, is not saying, hey, you have all the information about all the differential approaches of the Colombian society, and now you are going to see how people and the society is going to change. That's not that easy. This is a process itself, and this implies a lot of difficulties. And that's why I'm very happy that this data values project exists, because to have a common place of putting not only advancements, but problems is a very, very good practice in order to have a common perspective that this is a huge responsibility, but this is going to be an enabler of trust of the official statistics and at the same time of change in our societies. Thank you.
Thanks, Juan Daniel. It's so interesting to hear that relationship between the engagement and discussion and dialogue with that particular Indigenous community and the policy question, right? The policy question around how the resources are allocated and the definition and how that relates to measurement, both in terms of person and place, right? So all of these things coming together. So over to Francesca. From your view, working to support and advance the global statistical community's agenda, what are some of the opportunities for statistical offices to explore and embed more equitable approaches?
Thank you, Jenna. And great to hear from the experiences of Neil and Juan Daniel. I think we do have great opportunities, and we see new approaches that allows national statistical offices to engage with citizens in many different ways and establish partnerships with civil society, but also I think academia, even private sector can help in this process. But I would like to recall for a moment the discussion we had in Bern of the concept of assimilation versus affirmation, right? And the example that Juan Daniel was referring to, I think is very telling. We tend to assimilate and bring everything to sort of a common denominator from a preconceived framework. And we forget that, you know, we see things from our perspective. And we really have to make an effort and understand the values of those population groups so that they can have affirmation rather than assimilation. And that I think we have very clear, we heard that message loud and clear from those communities when we had the discussion in Bern. So it's not easy. I think we have the tools, we understand the approaches, but I think it's a very complex process to get to that point, right? Where you really need where you're really able to understand and redefine your conceptual frameworks. But in terms of what opportunities we have, I would like to say, you know, the global statistical community has a lot of guidance to offer, can offer that space for that discussion and to develop the right tools. For example, on citizen-generated data produced by citizens can really make an important contribution, both from the point of view of adding to the overall data production, but also an opportunity to engage with citizens in a constructive way, right? And now we have more work being done, development of toolkits to assess the data quality, development of tools to sort of come to a common, an agreement, let's say, on what it can be defined as citizen-generated data, as citizen science. So we need to invest in that and make sure that we have the right tools that can be standardized, can be applied by different countries, and can be compared and can be integrated in a meaningful way into official statistics. But even in the more traditional sort of data collection methods, I see that a new approach is emerging. For instance, in household surveys, there is a lot of attention now on inclusive approaches in designing survey tools, right? Addressing issues like, for instance, the need for self-reported as opposed to proxy responses for data at the individual level, oversampling techniques, methods being refined, you know, for capturing minority groups, etc. But I would also like to mention as a great opportunity the fact that the role of national statistical offices is clearly evolving, expanding as they become data stewards. And again, here the global statistical community has a lot to offer. The work, for instance, on data stewardship by the Statistical Commission can help in providing that guidance on the overall data governance and legal frameworks that can facilitate these processes, right? The involvement of all stakeholders for the integration of new data sources, for instance, it's very important how you, as we were saying earlier, including civil society, but at the same time maintaining the adherence to quality standards, so that you bring them in, but you make them really part of the official statistical production. So a lot needs to be done, both from the point of view of the methods, the tools, but also creating this culture I was mentioning earlier, right? So this is really part of this process of transformation of national statistical offices. And you need to develop the skills, right? Not all statistical offices might be well equipped to do that. So I think it's also part of developing sort of the strong foundational data system, making the overall National Statistical Office strong, because you also need to be strong, agile, have the right IT infrastructure to respond to changing demands quickly. I mean, we've seen that in the case of COVID, some were very well prepared and were jumping right in and able to integrate all new data sources, understand, what parts of the population needed to be counted that were not visible enough. Others did not have that agility because their foundational systems were not strong enough. So I think it's really a holistic approach, I would say, right? And it's an evolution of NSOs. And again, the global statistical community has a lot to offer in that sense. And I'm hopeful that the work, for instance, on data stewardship can be a great contribution to that. Over to you.
Thanks, Francesca. What I love about what you were saying is really the sense of the possible. There's, I think, sometimes a prevailing view that, for reasons of quality assurance and comparability and standardization, it's not possible to include people, to consult more, but what we're hearing, I think, is that there very much is a possibility, and there are many ways to do it, and it's not easy, but there's a very clear pathway there. So over to Benga. From the perspective of a person in civil society as an activist, what is one or two most important things that you think a statistical office can do to foster greater inclusion and equity?
So I think transparency always wins. One of the things that I've seen with some of the work we've done is when we engage with different governments, the ones who are opaque are the ones we work the hardest on. And usually you find that there's a reason why people don't want to share information. There's something they're hiding. But people who are transparent typically mean well. Typically, they want you to be engaged in the process. So I think one thing is transparency. As you design systems, yes, you got a PhD in data design and analysis, all of those things, but you can never know more than people who have the lived experience. And there's something you can learn from that. So I think transparency with the process is important. And the second is also, in terms of the socializing the information about the process itself. So one is the process being transparent. The other is about information about how people can engage with the process, because it's possible you design a transparent process that people can engage with and no one knows about it. I'm glad that just mentioned the African Union Institute. I know that institution has been existing for at least 9 years. But the question is, how many people within the data ecosystem on the African continent are aware of Statistics existence and engage with them? There's another question that the same person asked about, should citizens then define what data is? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not asking citizens to, put a new definition to data. What we're talking about is a co-design process. It's not about definition of what data is. It's about co-designing, the process so that works. And I think, still on the issue of putting out important information, there's a question in the comment from Madhavan about, my analysis for the region, there's a smiley at the end saying that my analysis is very mean. But guess what? That's we're talking about data here. We're talking about facts. We're talking about what's happening. And I think it's really important that in engaging processes, we use accurate data. I feel a bit sentimental when I talk about my continent, but the reality is we can't grow what we don't measure accurately. One of the reasons why we've messed up with many things across the world is because we've lied to ourselves in terms of data. We saw many of the problems we have today. We saw them coming, but we sort of romanticized the idea of maybe they wouldn't happen. But now I think we've learned one lesson, at least with COVID. We're learning a major lesson. Data doesn't lie. Data, well, could be manipulated, but if you're sincere about it, the data points speak, and you can listen to them and use them effectively for everyone to have their own wins.
Thanks so much, Benga, and appreciate that you've picked up on some of the questions in the chat. As always, we never have enough time, and I'm very eager to get to our colleagues from Kenya so that they can speak to their experiences. I have two quick questions, one each for Anil and Juan Daniel, that I will ask you to try to answer in 1 minute. So to Anil, do you believe that the political leaders or policymakers are really open to seeing NSOs playing this role more and more as a steward, advancing more equitable measurement, advancing more inclusion in statistical systems?
Well, I can't speak for every political leader, in the world, but I can say that in Canada, I think there is a genuine desire to do that. I think they see the value that we bring. So it's not just something that you just get handed, you have to earn it. And I think over and over again, the kind of details that we put out over the course, of 100 years, but especially, during this last couple of years, I think have shown that what we do is valuable. In fact, as a result of that, we've seen a historic investment in a number of areas where people have said, yeah, this makes sense. So inclusive growth, the environment, first ever census of the environment that we're now embarking on, a quality of life framework, getting deeper into justice systems and seeing the equity and the inequality within them. So I think when you earn the value and show that you can work in partnership, I think political leaders take notice, and they are not hesitant then to invest in data systems.
That's an excellent point that feeds into this question of investment as well, which is great. So Juan Daniel, a question to you about the cultural and organizational barriers, perhaps, that you've seen in your own context. So trying to advance the more inclusive and equitable approach from the statistics side that you've been working toward, where have you seen organizational and cultural barriers to that?
This is, thank you, Jenna, and this is something which is related with my former comment, is that in the case of Colombia, historically, those populations that we are trying to set dialogues right now have been discriminated. So the lack of trust of revealing realities about what's happening with them is something very important. That's why in this historically capitalized lack of trust in official statistics by historically invisible population is something that we are facing in a very harsh way. And this has implied that this interdisciplinarity make us conscious that we have to go slowly and to understand very well what Francesco was saying, is what are going to be the uses or what they are expecting this information to be useful for. And this is something very important, because even when we are talking in a very technical way with the GSPPM model, we have this mandate. We have to identify user needs at the beginning. And identifying user needs implies that we tackle very well and in a very delicate way the ethical dimensions of the conversations that we are facing. And I'm not going to be cheerful. That's been very difficult in Colombia, but we have a set of examples, for example, in the civil registry and vital statistics, that we are empowering midwives to certificate births in indigenous territories, something that was tremendously difficult in the past. But when you understand the purpose of them, that they want their children to be visible in the health system and to facilitate a platform for them to be empowered in order to certificate births in the indigenous territories, you set a trust channel because they say this is going to be useful. And we were very happy when we received a message of a midwife saying, look, this is the first baby certifying with the platform that you designed. And we are being inclusive, we are being equitable, and at the same time, we are providing useful solutions of the information that they provide. So the lack of trust is a barrier, but we believe that interdisciplinary approaches and understanding the purpose of the information from those invisible societies is going to be tremendously important in order to provide trust and to allow information to include that.
Thank you so much, Juan Daniel. And thanks to all the panelists for this portion of the discussion. It's been so rich, so many great examples and perspectives. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Karen Bett, who's going to moderate our sort of spotlight or case study on Kenya. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Jenna, and thank you so much for the speakers in the first section. I think it has been a really interesting conversation hearing from the NSOs and the countries that they represent. We now want to go into a spotlight session where we'll talk about experiences from two key stakeholders, from Sally, who represents UDPK in Kenya, and from Mr. Awes, who is representing the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics here in Kenya. I have a couple of questions for you, Sally and Mr. Awes. We'll take about 15 minutes in this discussion. I think we want to just zoom into the experiences in Kenya working on disability data and the efforts that these two organizations have been putting to champion or to strengthen disability data. I know this has been running for about 7 years now, and we really want to hear some of the motivation, some of the background to this work. So I'll start with you, Sally. Maybe you can just give us a little bit of a background on how the dialogue began with KNBS. What have been some of the milestones you have seen working together with KNBS?
Thank you, Karen. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Let me start by saying that UDPK is the umbrella organization of persons with disabilities in Kenya. And as an OPD, we do advocate for the rights of persons with disabilities and their meaningful involvement in planning, decision-making, and implementation. So our dialogue with the government, and particularly the Bureau of Statistics, started 5 years ago. That is about 2017, just around the time when Kenya was planning to conduct its population census. So because of our constant, calls to Kenya Bureau of Statistics, they went ahead to organize an initial disability stakeholders meeting in 2017. And the key push for us as the disability sector was that desire, where, government planning and interventions are informed by disability data. So, and a good place for us, we felt was to influence was beginning with the census. So out of that meeting, we got to influence the Bureau of Statistics to use the Washington module of short questions for collecting disability data. So we got, it took a bit of, push and pull here, because the Bureau was a bit resistant at first, because they said, well, these questions you want us to add here will make, the questionnaire too long. But because of that dialogue that we had held for quite a long time, we managed to get, those short module questions included. And we got some data, on people with disabilities. During that period, we got quite senior officials from the Bureau trained on using the Washington module of short questions. There are some challenges that we have. It's a journey that we took, but we are not saying it's all rosy. I'll explain the challenges a little bit later, Rose. But then, so beyond the statistics, beyond the census and the survey that the Kenyan government had conducted in 2008, as a sector, we felt that it was crucial that government also collects disability data, because they use a lot of administrative sources to collect a lot of information on access to services by citizens. They collect a lot of information during registration of birth and deaths, but you'll find disability data is not collected. So we pushed for another disability stakeholders meeting that took place in 2020, February, and an outcome of this meeting is that we got a disability statistics technical working group comprising of OPDs, civil society organizations, and the Bureau itself, and also some of our development partners being part of this committee. So the drive was to think about how do we work with the Bureau and other government departments to ensure that when they're collecting administrative data and data on service delivery, that this data is inclusive of people with disabilities. So Karen, that is our background. That has been our journey so far. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sally. And just to pick the conversation and coming to you, Mr. Awes, what can you say about how CAN-BS's perception and approach to generating disability data has shifted because of working with organizations like UDPK that Sally represents? So tell us more about the perception and the approach and how that has changed within CAN-BS.
Okay, thank you very much. Since we started the censuses, we actually started producing the census data in 2007, where we had a survey on national disability, although the involvement of the person with disability was not very strong. Then we had the census in 2009. We also produced the data at that time. I can say it was still not very strong, but in the last 5 years, we were able to work closely with all the stakeholders, and were able to do the censuses in 2019, and the involvement of the persons with disability has been very strong. As my colleague has also said, that we have formed what we call the Technical Working Committee, and that one has strengthened our working together, because we believe we are not experts in everything, and certain groups that are often excluded, like disability, need to guide us in their field. So the approach is that we provide the expertise, but then they also provide us with their experiences in the field and the understanding of the disability, because us, we are just experts in statistics, and then they are the experts of disability advocates. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Awes. I think you're touching on the point that you're bringing in expertise, both from the NSO and from the disability advocates, so that combination is stronger together. I'm back to you, Sally, and I want to just hear from you, what have been the key learnings from your perspective, and what were some of the challenges that you had to overcome together?
Thank you, Karen. From working together with the Bureau and other CSOs and different partners that we are working together in this working group, I'd say that it's a journey. It's a journey, getting inclusion and just bringing the language of collaboration, and changing the way the system works, the way things have always been done. is not easy, you know. Bringing people to begin talking in different languages and talking inclusion is a journey. We've learned that just because you have very good laws, and in Kenya, Kenya is said to have good laws, you know, on you know, protecting the rights of people with disabilities, right from our constitution, and to even to the Persons with Disabilities Act, and a number of policies. So you can't assume that just because we have very good laws, then it's automatic that that will be taken in and implemented. There has to be that dialogue and working together, all of us with our various expertise to make things happen. And, you know, resources, you know, even to make our working group meet is also a challenge. But when we pull together, you'll find, for example, even when sometimes government does not have the resources, then you'll find us as CSOs, we might have some resources to facilitate, you know, the sittings of these committees. So I'd say there's value in working together. But then in terms of challenges, like I mentioned earlier, we just getting to use the Washington module of collecting data on persons with disabilities. Yes, we do appreciate that step, but there were some challenges, you know, with the data that we got in terms of its validity, and that's still discussions that we're having with the sector and also with the Bureau. For instance, the results that we got from the census does not capture, you know, the data on children with disabilities. So there's also the limited training that, you know, the enumerators, you know, who are collecting data during census. So they were not, you know, properly trained on how to pose the questions. So it's critical. So you'll find if they were not properly trained, it means that they were probably not asking questions, you know, in an effective way. And then still there is stigma, you know, associated with acknowledging disability. So we still have a long journey to walk in as far as, you know, ensuring that disability inclusion is entrenched in government systems, and that everyone in the system, right from senior government officials all the way to whoever is collecting the data, understands how to, you know, collect data, how to pose the questions, and how to, you know, interpret that data. So that's what I'd say we've learned so far. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Sally. I have one more question for you, but let me go to Mr. West first. And Mr. West, I just want to understand from the perspective of KNBS, what are some of the factors that enable this collaboration to have concrete outcomes, and how have some of these learnings informed KNBS's work more broadly?
Okay, thank you very much. Let me say, first of all, that there was a unity among stakeholders. As I've explained earlier, that we have been having the forums together. I think that is one of the factors. And the disability advocates have one common voice and were clear on what they wanted. They wanted disability data in Kenya to be improved. Being an NSO, it was much simpler to work with organized group, with Congress priorities compared to situations where priorities are dispersed. Today, we are able to publish some of the data in our government publications, like what we will have the annual economic survey. So that one used not to happen before, but for now we are able to publish in those areas. Again, we are planning also to have like the national survey for persons with disability in the near future, and we hope to work very closely together with the disability fraternity. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Awes. That's short and precise. I'll come to you, Sally, just as we sort of wrap up this conversation. If there's one tip you can give to civil society organizations who are interested in working more closely with the NSOs, what would that tip be?
Thank you, Karen. So in addition to the achievements, let me mention here that it's critical I mention here, as a result of that collaborative approach with working with government, in July 2018, during the Global Disability Summit, the government of Kenya signed up to or committed to the Inclusive Data Charter. And this data charter is a unique, multi-stakeholder initiative that also brings together government departments, particularly the Ministry of Labor, to work together, to advance inclusion in data. So together with the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development, who lead the IDC, we must say that as OPDs, we are very proud because we are part of this initiative, and we have been helping the Ministry of Labor. This is our focal point ministry that coordinates disability in Kenya. We've helped them to develop their own inclusive data charter action plan of how they see it as a way that they will take to ensure that that vision is implemented. So we are really proud of that step so far. In terms of a tip that I'd give a CSO that intends to work in this area is get together, speak with one voice as organizations that are pushing for an issue, and then dialogue with government, because sometimes we as CSOs, sometimes we tend to be very aggressive, or and we in this aggression we make government defensive. But when we sit together in a round table, we dialogue, we come up with an action plan, and then the important thing is we follow through together, walk that journey together with the respective government department, and then you'll see your goals coming through. You'll see objectives beginning to be achieved. So that would be my tip from our experience. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Sally. I think that tip is really strong around that common voice and making sure that it's coming through as objective rather than really subjective. I'll come to you now, Awes, and thinking from the perspective of an NSO, what is your one tip to national statistical officers who are interested in working more closely with civil society organizations?
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, there are many tips I could give, but let me just share one. Treat the relationships between the National Statistics Office, or KNBS in this case, and the civil society as a relationship of equals. NSOs have the statistical expertise, civil society have the knowledge. So if we can put the two together, we'll be able to do a lot in the field of statistics. Working together multiples the returns. It is also helpful to start by working with the coordinator civil society so that they speak in one voice, and this makes work easier. For us, we welcome all stakeholders to work with us as a bureau. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Awes. And I want to also thank you, Sally, for that input in terms of just giving Kenya's experience on championing disability data. I think you've said it clearly, Sally, that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So the journey is not over, but at least it's much ahead from at least where you started. So that's the end of sort of this spotlight conversation on Kenya. If you want to reach out to know more about this relationship, we'll be happy to share the contacts of Sally and also Mr. Awes. I think we're sort of coming to the end of our webinar, and I just want to give my sincere appreciation to the panelists in the first part from Statistics Canada and also from Statistics Colombia, and of course from Francesca and Jenna and Benga, and also colleagues who joined me in the second part, Sally and Mr. Awes, thank you too for making time. And of course, I wouldn't forget the interpreters for Spanish. We give you thanks also for that. We have a short poll that will be going up in a few minutes. We want to hear your feedback. How can we improve future webinars? How can you improve future discussions on this topic on data values? The team at the Data Values Project will be happy to engage with you more and also hear back, hear your experiences as institutions, as countries, as ordinary citizens about the value of data and what we must do to improve or at least increase these values and change these values. So that's it from me and from my colleagues at the Global Partnership. I want to wish you all a happy weekend. If you're in the late times or just winding up your day, and if you're starting your day, just to wish you a nice rest of your day. And yeah, thank you and goodbye from us.